Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of September 16th. We have a full docket of items tonight, so we're going to jump right in. What was published for our agenda is the agenda, just not in order. We are going to start with Article 16, which is the street acceptance. Jim, any
Sure.
comments?
As you know, this is we have these usually every fall town meeting. This is for Hancock Way. It's just basically to vote to accept it as a road. It's a road located in North Walpole. I've attached 3 maps for you as part of the package, just to identify the spot. Rick Mattson, Carl Baldoff, town engineer, and Chris Johnson, the assistant town engineer, are all here. It's been reviewed. It's acceptable to them. The selectmen are voting to lay it out tomorrow night, and we're going to vote favorable action on it also.
Any questions or comments for Jim? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion for favorable action.
By Denny, seconded by Brian.
Excuse me, we can't hear you.
Sorry.
So either bring your microphone
Yep.
closer or speak louder.
Speak louder. Okay. So we have a motion to accept Article 18, street acceptance by Denny. Sorry, 16, by Denny, seconded by Brian. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? 15-0-0. The other one thing I want to mention to everybody is that normally we are recorded and rebroadcasted. Tonight we are live on Walpole Cable. So please remember that when you make your comments and so forth. Next item is we're going to go to our capital budget.
Sure. I know Chairman Forsberg is here. And I know we have talked about, since we have such a full agenda, I think Ed was going to go article by article. So starting with Article 4, which is the capital equipment article. Total voted on that was $866,575. All the funding source, with one exception, is funding through free cash. The one exception is the high school partial roof replacement. What I'm recommending at this time is the spring 2018 Article 19 be reappropriated. That was for the Elm Street roof at the time. The roof is complete. Don's comfortable with reappropriating that money. So I'll take any questions.
So the 250 is left over from that project?
Yes, that original appropriation was
Any specific questions on Article 4?
So I'm not so much about the article, but the Elm Street School was originally the partial roof was originally 450?
Yes, the
And how-
front
And you said it was,
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, can people have to really shout?
Yeah.
I can't hear a
The
thing.
microphone's only for recording, so we got to project.
sorry. It was just a question about the original Elm Street School. It was 450 and the remainder was...
The original appropriation was for $450,000. The project was completed this summer, I believe, and that's the funds that are left over. Don he was a little bit aggressive with the quotes when we originally received it. The bids came in very favorably, and that's why we're asking for reappropriation.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Has,
Yes, Andrew?
has capital budget voted on this?
Yes. Affirmative.
All right, yeah. You can go to the microphone.
Probably needs a microphone for recording.
Yes, capital budget voted favorable action 700, and the amounts that Jim had just mentioned.
Thank you.
There being no other questions? Any questions?
I just motion for favorable action for Article 4 in the amount of $866,575.
Second?
Seconded by Andrew. No other questions and comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? 15-0-0.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
next article is Article 5, which is the general equipment purchase. It covers a wide range of equipment from all the way from the Board of Assessors to Police Department, Fire Department, Parks, DPW, and the School Department. Capital budget did vote the funding sources as listed above in the third column there. And I'll take any questions you may have, but I would like to point out that as part of the school infrastructure capital equipment purchases here, there's $400,000 for an infrastructure assessment associated with the high school. That's basically let's start to conduct a study to see what's really needed up at the high school for classroom sizes, gymnasium sizes, science lab, collaborative learning space, and also a 3-year purchase to get the schools up on their Chromebooks instead of stretching it out over 3 years and doing a quick ban or something like that. Recommending $420 for a free cash up front on that one. The school committee and school superintendent, I think, like that idea. We're not stretching it up. We're getting the kids up to speed with all the technology that they're going to need for a couple of years. So, Ed, anything to add?
I know just the difference in the funding sources. Did you want to mention that?
Yeah, okay, so we did recommend, the funding sources were free cash, the ambulance fund, which funded the ambulance replacement and the turnout gear. And then we got a little creative towards the end, which we had technology infrastructure improvements. That does qualify under the cable grant that we received from FiOS and from Xfinity. So we got a little creative there just to make sure that we get everything in.
What specifically is the, being done on that technology infrastructure improvements?
We have a very strict town accountant. She only allows certain things to get done under there. And one of those items that qualify is specifically technology. Basically, it's going to be running the cables and the wires throughout the building. I know I saw Ann Arpin up and Mike shaking his head, so it's basically to improve the cable infrastructure.
Excellent.
Jim, is that currently in their budget, or are they going to have to amend the budget this year to cover that?
No, that's going to be funded through capital here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even though we're using their funds, it doesn't have to be
Oh,
covered?
no, you're saying there, meaning the cable.
Right.
No, it's part of the town funds. It's not part of
Okay.
this, yeah.
Lisa?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the special education van is not getting funded?
Yes, it is not getting funded. It's not recommended at this time. I spoke to the school business manager. He advised me that he could absorb those costs as part of his transportation budget, and he was satisfied with that.
So we will have a van, just not through this process?
Yes, correct.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a clarification on the Chromebooks, was it supposed to be done over 3 years, and we're pushing that all into 1 year?
What we've done in the past, we've done it 2 different ways. We've done it through a ban, and then we did it through some low-interest loan that I can remember in the past. But we always bought them up front and then funded over 3 years. But this way, we're just
Okay.
paying it off in 1 year.
Okay, so all the devices in the 1 year, and then it was paid, okay.
To the school department, with the new Chromebook purchase, is that going to get all the high school students and then most of the middle school students on their own Chromebooks for the school year?
I'm Ann Arpin. I can clarify. Yes, we started a one-to-one program. Right now, all the high school students, grades 9 through 12, have a Chromebook. This will continue that plan. We're cycling down the ones from seniors down to elementary. Our grades 7 and 8 are also now on the one-to-one program. So this plan will continue with the annual replacement of new or purchase of new devices for grade 7. And it also includes a sustainability plan. As we do recycle some of the Chromebooks down, as time goes on, the lower grades will also need to have Chromebook replacements.
So this will get all 6th graders that come into 7th grade next year, and seniors will pass it down to the elementary?
Correct.
Okay. Yes, sure.
Quick question, are any of these hit hard by the Google Auto Update?
No, actually, well, the existing devices,
Right.
yes, yeah. Our Samsungs, which were on the original purchase, are now being cycled out. Acers, which is another fairly large batch, are being cycled out starting next summer. And then our plan is to purchase new so that we have a device that has a 6-year or 6.5-year auto update.
And you're comfortable at this point? Like where this'll, you're
Sure.
not gonna be stressed to provide the devices?
No, no, under this plan, no. This is a solid purchase plan for our one-to-one program, as well as a sustainability plan for elementary.
Andrew?
I just had some broad questions about the Walpole High School infrastructure assessment for $400,000. So is this a scaled down, and I'm okay with whoever wants to answer this study. Is this like a mini version of the feasibility study that's being done for the middle schools? And like, who do you hire to do this? Is it just like engineers that walk the school and tell you this hallway or this gymnasium or
Yeah,
whatever needs to be
this
replaced?
is separate from the middle school feasibility study. So in your packet, you should have a description of what the school building study entails. And as you know, that we identified areas of concern with the middle schools. And we also submitted a statement of interest for both the high school and the middle schools. And they had an appetite for the middle school project, not the high school project. So because of that, we really have significant needs at the high school. So this is completely separate from the MSBA.
Sorry, just to follow up, and who does it? I guess that's what I was getting at, is, I understand that it's different. Is it like an engineering firm that, or is it someone who walks through the gym?
Yeah, we've
and
met
says-
with the project manager, and what they did is they indicated it could be done for that request, that request of $400,000. And that wouldn't be more, it would build in for the flexibility and additional costs. It would have to go out, and we would have to see, but that's the project manager.
Okay, great.
Is Ally?
The handout that you referred to, I'm not seeing that. I have about 10 blank pages.
We have extra copies we can give you.
But I think Lucy, she doesn't have it either, so I'm not
It
sure.
talks about what the purpose of the study is, really to go ahead and identify the needs and determine the most appropriate and cost-effective for meeting those needs of what we need at the high school.
Anybody else?
Yes.
No, just a follow-up. Is it not worthwhile to continue to pursue writing statements of interest for the high school too?
The MSBA only has an appetite for one, so we have to stick with the middle school right now and see that through. We're in the eligibility period, soon to be in the feasibility period after September, going into December, and then we go with that MSBA, and then once that's done, then possibly.
So the town can't have multiple state of interest where we have one building that's kind of in a concrete
Yeah.
timeframe? Okay.
Sorry, I don't have that in there. Can you just explain to me what this study is?
Feasibility study, the building study.
Mhm.
So the building study would be a study to look at space allocations and what a modern education looks for as compared to what our building currently has. So looking at space requirements such as the science labs, are they big enough? Do they meet the demands of a current curriculum in science? They would look at common collaborative spaces. Do we have those types of spaces? All the things that a modern building would have as compared to what our current high school has. They would look at the architecture, the design of the building. They'd look at the mechanicals within the building, really do an all-around assessment of our current building to see, can it meet what the demands are today for a modern education?
So how does this tie in with the high school being accredited? I guess what I'm trying to understand is, you do these accreditation studies, the school passes, and now you want to do another study, and I'm just kind of trying to understand why you want to do this study at this time.
So the two are separate. It's a separate analysis. NEASC, who does a review of what the current requirements are for the building according to their association, is what that review is, and that's what gives you the accreditation. That happens every 10 years. We happen to be going through it this year. But that doesn't look necessarily at the specifics of what we're dealing with, the infrastructure within the building, the age of the building, the different areas within the building. It may cover some of it, but not at the level of detail that a building study would do. It would give us much more information for what our kids need today to have a modern education.
And a lot of those needs are outlined in that statement of interest that you can find that we submitted a few years ago. And like just quick examples, like the science labs, they're approximately 900 square feet, where MSBA wants us at 1440 square feet. Space is really an issue. Music, we have one music room, totally inadequate. We can't even offer new courses. The gym, we're going to need to increase phys ed classes. All students are going to be required to take phys ed. We have one gym. Stephen and Bush can talk about that, about the crowding there. There's really no open space for students to work. Space for varied instruction. We have a much greater increase in student diverse group of learners.
What I'm wondering about is, like, do you, the administration, the teachers, have you come up with like a list of needs? And so you need this study for them to tell you how you go about doing it? Or is this study saying, we're gonna come up with your list of needs, and then we'll tell you how to do it? Like,
We
who's
have a list
driving the study?
We have a list of needs of where we feel that there are space issues, and Stephen Imbush has talked, and you can talk a little bit more about the space issues. And we want them to be able to provide us some options of what we can do in the most cost-effective way. Do you want to speak to it a little bit?
Sure. You know, what I'm looking at is certain needs that some new construction really is all I can see as an alternative for achieving what we need. For example, a music room for right now is in what used to be way back 20 years ago a cafeteria. Very, very low ceilings, totally inadequate for a music room. But if we were to build a new music room, that space could be then utilized for other things that we do need. I mean, I need programming, further programming in special ed so that I can keep as many kids in district as possible. I know that I can repurpose rooms that are going to be used elsewhere. NIAS doesn't get into that level of analysis of the building. And that's why this study is critical at this point. So we can, but we do have an idea of what we're looking for. We just need somebody to come in and take a look at, building-wise, how we can make that happen. So that's how it'll work.
Megan?
So just to follow up on that a little bit, so is the study itself expected to give you some layout options? So for example, you move the music room over here, then you put something else there. So it's going to give you actual options, not just state again, gee, the music room looks inadequate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any
Other questions?
As a quick question, does this address any population growth or community, or is it just solely based on the building?
Good question. Since we have a spacing issue, yes, it needs to address the population growth. We know that there's going to be growth in town. We just heard about another possible growth that's coming into town. So yes.
Thank you.
Motion for favorable action for Article 5 in the amount of $2,113,905 with funding coming from the ambulance fund, free cash, and cable.
Overlay. As identified in the memo.
Did you get a second?
A second. Kathleen seconded.
Waiting for you.
I'll second, yeah.
No, you're
I
Kathleen.
couldn't hear.
Moving slow.
There's no other questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? 15-0-0.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Article 6 relates to the street and drainage improvements. I would point out that we have two specific articles that relate to street and drainage improvements. Reason being is the second article, Article 7, relates specifically for borrowing. So this one is just funded through free cash and then the town's appropriation from Chapter 90 that we receive from the state each year. The funding sources are listed out there. I would point out that this is the first time in a long time that we've had actually sidewalks on there. Director Mattson put in for $350,000. Just to keep everything balanced here, I could only recommend $100,000 at this time, but I like to see that we're getting on track with the sidewalks and everything. We've been dormant for a little bit on that, and maybe next year we can put a little bit more money than the 100 that's there now. But the capital budget voted favorable action in the amounts listed here and the funding sources.
So I'm fully supportive of this. My only question is, and maybe I'm telling on myself about where my mind's at, but to what extent do these sidewalk improvements and street improvements take into account future development or proposed development? Because both downtown and elsewhere, we have major projects, and I'm just wondering if, I'm sure there's a process with DPW in terms of how they prioritize streets, and so it's fair throughout the town, but how do they plan ahead in terms of, well, we're gonna have a developer build a bunch of sidewalks here because of a apartment complex? I'm just curious.
So I can specifically speak towards the two major projects going on right in the downtown area. We've waited to do any improvements down there because we're well aware that they're gonna be ripping up sidewalks. They're gonna be putting new sidewalks in, new walking spaces, temporary walking spaces, and they're also gonna be putting utility cuts in there and everything. So we're waiting on those areas to do any specific improvements. And we do have some mitigation agreement in place with both developers, but there will be improved sidewalks in there and streetways in there after these projects are completed. The Walpole Woodworkers project, that's a little different. Part of their agreement with the town is they had to make certain improvements to the areas right near High Plains Street and East Street, right out here by Town Hall, and right out in front between Eastover Road and their development there. So that's built into there. They were required to do those improvements.
So this East Street improvement in Article 7, that probably takes into account the Walpole Woodworkers, what Pulte is doing to...
I believe it's a different part of East Street there.
The middle school towards Washington?
Yeah, so it's not that, we wouldn't go in, put a new road in there, and then have them finish it. No, we're gonna wait to do that road.
Thanks.
They're paving East Street now, down the other end.
Yeah, but that's a different chapter. That's previous years.
Other questions?
Yeah, through you. I understand the downtown sidewalks were redone, I think, 2 years ago. Are they getting redone?
No, we would not
Okay.
redo them, yeah.
That's all.
Any other questions? Any?
Motion for favorable action for Article 6 in the amount of $1,019,666 coming from Chapter 90 funds? Free cash. It's free cash too?
Second.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Seconded by Susan.
Yep.
No other questions? And all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, 15-0-0. Article 7.
Article 7 is, as I mentioned, the borrowing article. Again, Director Batson, put it all in, which I was happy to see. He and I talked before, but we have been doing this at $200,000 a pop. I think this is our 7th or 9th year. Well, okay. Yeah, we've been doing it for a long time, and it's been consistently 200,000. We bumped it up. We doubled it here. It stays. It's in that multicolored sheet that I see that's right in front of you, Mr. Chairman. So it keeps us within our borrowing limits there, and it's just we got to get a little bit more aggressive on this, and this just gets us out in front of that.
You know, in the past, the 200,000 was on a 3-year ban, and now we're gonna move to a 5-year because of the dollar amount.
Yeah.
I just looked at the table, so.
Question. So, 400 this year, do we anticipate going back to 200 next year?
I'm hoping we can stay at the 400 going forward.
Any other questions, comments? Denny?
Motion for favorable action on Article 7, in the amount of 400,000 from borrow.
Second.
Seconded by Susan. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? 15-0-0. That concludes the bulk of the capital budget items. Back to Article 2. Annual budget adjustments. included in tonight's package because it was given to us like 2 weeks ago.
So would you like me to run through where I was at with this? So where I was at is I requested or recommended a few different changes to the budgets. $20,000 to the clerk budget with $10,000 going to be set aside for the electronic voting, and recommending $10,000 to deal with any costs associated with the change as a result of Article 19 and 20. And I think the committee had some questions about that specific recommendation. Then another $6,500 for the, to cover the costs associated with the early voting with the March election. At the time when the clerk, when she put in her budget, we weren't really sure what what we were gonna do with the federal election. She came to me right before town meeting was going forward in May and said they're gonna mandate that we go ahead and do this. So it was kinda too late. I figured we could adjust at the time. And then $55,000 for the solid waste and recycling budget. And a couple of you, I think this is on your last page, a couple of you had specifically asked me, you know, are we gonna have enough money with the $55,000 to cover the added cost with the recycling, now that we're going to be responsible for it? And $55,000 actually gets us there. I had Robin and Melissa, our Deputy Board of Health Director, look at it. They were comfortable with 55. The sheet here specifically says 49,598. I asked them to build in about a 10% buffer in there in case there were any surprises or spikes. So that's more or less where I'm coming from with the solid waste. Board of Health salaries is to address the shortfall that's anticipated there as a result of Robin retiring. Same goes for, that was $12,000. Engineer salaries, same situation there, $28,000. And the debt and interest budget, I'm recommending $75,000 go towards that budget to start planning for some of these other projects that are coming up. So I thought the big question was around the town clerk's budget there. Where did I come up with the $10,000 to cover the costs associated with 19 and 20? The clerk and I worked together. She had talked to one Western Mass town, a lot smaller than Walpole. I thought it was 5,000 to 10,000. Their cost was about 5,000. I know when we have made changes to the general code in the past, it's been about 3 or so thousand, 3 to 5. So I'm comfortable with $10,000. Town council's comfortable with $10,000 right there. So I'll take any questions you may have.
So if I understand it correctly, roughly 5,000 is for the printing of the charters, when, you know, if that should happen. And then the other 5,000 is for the council fees? That's my recollection, but that could be wrong.
Ish. You know, I didn't know if it was gonna cost us extra money to petition the state legislature, if that was necessary. So I was comfortable with the extra 5 being built in there, so.
Other questions? Okay, Benny?
Motion for favorable action for Article 2 in the amount of $196,560. Raised through from taxation.
Second.
Seconded by Susan. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained?
Abstain.
Who
Is
abstained,
that
Jeff?
Jeff? Now the one that everybody in the audience is waiting for, Article 3.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I have good news. Capital budget met just before this, recommended favorable action 600 on this, on the funding sources as identified. We did receive the bids in, the bids were favorable. This time we actually received 6 bidders compared to 5 last time. The low bidder was RAD, they're based in Rockland. The Weston and Sampson, our project team is in the process of reviewing and vetting them, but they're well-known across the state. They've worked with them before. I don't expect any major issues or concerns. I know Selectman Barrett is here to provide you with presentation, and then if you don't mind, we could take some questions.
While they get that set up, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Ben Barrett. I'm on the Board of Selectmen. The board is bringing forward this Article 3 at Fall Town Meeting. So I'm here to answer any questions you have and discuss with you the certain aspects of this proposed project. I have probably 5 or 6 slides here tonight, which the purpose of is to talk about this new proposed project, how it differs from the project we talked about in the spring. As Jim alluded to, the financing of the project, the financial plan, and the borrowing included with that, and then also the work that's been done recently in order to get this project before you tonight. Items that are not covered in the presentation is, the 10 to 15 years of work that were done to bring this project up to this past spring. Certainly that's up for discussion, and I don't want to inhibit any questions or anything in any way. So we'll get through these slides quickly, and then really we're here to answer questions and have a good discussion about the project. So by way of a status update, going back to June of this year, that's when the board voted to move forward with the bare bone plans for this and requested that Weston and Sampson go forward, revise the plans for this bare bone scope. On August 4th, Weston and Sampson completed the revised plan, and on or about that date, it went out to bid. And on September 4th, we had organized a meeting with youth sports groups, high school sports, other interested residents to discuss the project update and the fundraising. I saw many of you there, so I appreciate that. Thank you. And over 30 individuals showed up, and we had a great buy-in from the group and have been moving forward with some great ideas for fundraising for this project. On the 12th, bids were received here before you tonight to discuss the project. On September 26th, currently there's another follow-up meeting to discuss the fundraising approaches and the items that have been acted on since the September 4th meeting. Just to be clear, the fundraising that is underway and starting to take place is for scope items that have been removed from the project. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. But we have a lot of buy-in on the fundraising. So far, we've had one lawyer step forward to help put together a 501c, people interested in putting together that nonprofit group, which is a must for those of you who have been involved in these in the past. And we've also reached out to local corporations, banks, and the usual folks there to get their input and really to see what their taste was for this sort of project. And we've received very favorable feedback in that regard. So, as we've seen in the past, and what I've been saying lately is that, the town of Walpole has an excellent track record in being able to raise funds for certain needs, identified needs. And I think that we're primed to do that again when hopefully this passes a fall town meeting. Okay, so briefly, the proposed project, it is the 2 synthetic fields, 2 grass fields, the baseball, softball, and then the walking path and nature trails. And as you can see, we have the parking lots and all the access and drainage and utilities that are required. And that's literally it. The scope that has been eliminated from the plan is the snack bar and bathrooms, building, paved lots, basketball courts, playgrounds, a substantial reduction in the landscaping budget, and we classified the field lighting as alternates. And as we see when we get into the financing plan, and as Jim alluded to, the bids came in very favorably. So it looks like we'll be able to include that. So here's the scope and the financial plan for the project, starting off most importantly with the cost. The base scope, as I said, it includes all of the site prep, demo, and the other pieces that you see there. That base scope cost came in at $5.9 million, and each of the 2 alternates came in at the values you see, including a contingency of 10%, actually I guess it's 10.5% contingency, brings the total cost of the project to $7.9 million. There were folks who were interested in how that compares, not only in scope, but in cost to the project that was proposed last year. And the project last year was, and Jim, correct me if I have my numbers here, but was 9.6 million, at Springtown meeting. So in here, we've been able to decrease it to 7.9. And the main driver of that decrease is the scope decrease. It's all of the items that were taken out. So in fact, and not to confuse the issue, but if you took this base scope and aligned it with the base scope that was in the spring project, which we can't do because the bids weren't broken out in that manner, that project in the spring would be less than 5.9 million. So as with any infrastructure project, they do get more expensive. The price will go up over time. All right. So to talk a little bit about the financing plan, there's 3 parts to it. And I know that the package that you all received had 2 discrete parts, but we wanted to break it into 3 with the hope that it would be a little bit easier for folks to understand at town meeting. The first source of funds is town funds from previously appropriated funding sources, 2.1 million, and we'll get into each of these briefly. The second is new free cash from this town meeting. It's the recommendation, which you may have heard under the capital budget. And then, of course, the borrowing, which is 3.9 million. And as I mentioned previously, that the fundraising will be conducted for items that are not in the current bid. So when we start talking about, and I can take specific questions on that, but folks who are very interested in having bathrooms and a snack shack and items like that, which are very much within reach for our fundraising groups. So the town funds for reappropriation from previously appropriated funding sources, the new police station, in which I have there a couple of highlights for previous capital appropriations for the new police station, the Superfund cleanup for South Street, the Memorial Pond, Fall Town Meeting 2000 appropriation, a portion of the available funds for overlay, the previous 2018 Fall Town Meeting free cash at 1.3, and then new growth for fiscal year 20, which again is a portion of available funds which are dedicated to this project. So the total of town funds which would be reappropriated for use here is 2.1 and change. So then we have the free cash portion, and the reason why I wanted to break this out is because I feel like we always have difficulty when talking about free cash and where it comes from, where it goes to. So I just want to be really clear with everyone what the intent is with this article. And that is to take the free cash total, which you all have assessed, and I know that we've already spent 30 minutes or so of this meeting talking about it, so you all are familiar with it. But these are the items that were addressed utilizing those funds before it was appropriated to the project. So I know that people have a lot of concerns about things in town that need funding, where they want to see the cash allocated, and I think that Jim has done an excellent job of that. We're being able to meet a lot of the needs of the schools and elsewhere in the town prior to meeting the needs of this infrastructure project. And then borrowing, so it's simply the math. So the 7.9 million total cost, less the funds on hand, less the free cash, brings us to a total borrowing figure of 3.9 million. And as all of you are aware, that is within the current debt limit of the town and fits within the debt schedule, so there would be no requirement to raise that for this project. And I would point out the 7.9, just really ecstatic about the bids that we got and how low they came in, how competitive it was, and our ability to fit the lights in, which certainly we've had a lot of discussion in our fundraising meetings and other meetings about this Fields project about how important the lights are to the success of it. So really pleased to be able to fit that in within a reasonable budget for the project. And that's it. So I went through that pretty quick. So any questions or points of discussion, suggestions?
Mark?
In the fundraising meeting, what additions to the overall project are you talking about funding? Like a pecking order, for instance, playgrounds first, or what are the plans?
Yeah. I think, generally the feedback that we've received is that since we're able to meet the lights conceivably with the main part of the scope, is people want to see bathrooms. And I think that that's part of the discussion, and I would invite anybody who's watching or will watch this or who's here tonight to come on the 26th to our next meeting, because that's really where the rubber's gonna meet the road on that. Because we have the bids now, and we know the scope, and we know the lights are in. We can turn our focus elsewhere, and really start crunching some numbers and saying, is a super shed, a so-called super shed with a snack bar and all these other bells and whistles, is that really what people want? Is it doable? Is it reasonable? Or should we do something like a playground as a first step? So that's still to be determined, but.
The other thing you mentioned, that you can't do a bid comparison between the two. Am I correct, you're unable to, like, for instance, here are your new costs, it's the fields, you drop these out. I'm just wondering, can you give me, in the spring, here were the items, here was the cost, and now here are the items and there's the cost, and so I could look at one piece and say, this was in there, this isn't in there, and understand the cost difference?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have that spreadsheet right here. So what I tried to do is I took the bids received, the base, 2 alternates, and then broke it out to right underneath the 4 bids received in the spring. So you can, literally, I was just showing it to Denny. You can just compare that, so I can share that with you.
Okay.
I believe is the shed broken out there?
Yeah, the shed
the
is
snacks.
broken out in the April 2019.
In
bid,
April
but not
2019.
this bid.
Right.
Neither is the playground. So you won't see the playground, you won't see the splash pad, because we didn't even bother bidding those items out. All we did was base and then the alternates for the lights. It was alternate 1, 2. But I'll share it with you.
Okay, thank you.
Penny? Yeah, if fundraising doesn't support the bathrooms, are we building out the infrastructure to add them later? Is that part of the bid?
The infrastructure for the sewer and water will be laid.
Jim, I'm looking at the debt schedule and trying to decipher. So if we're gonna borrow like $1 or $2 million less than you had originally planned on, right, when the plan was to do the larger project, did you guys pull forward other capital budget items or other borrowing to keep the debt payment steady? You know what I'm trying to ask?
So Ben had the same question for me this afternoon. So I went back and I printed out what we were working off of in the spring. And I'll share it with you folks if you'd like. In the spring, what we had proposed was $4.5 million to be borrowed in FY '21. We were staggering it because it was a challenge to meet that. And we were going to borrow $2 million in FY '22. And that's the way we were hoping to set up the financing. So by only borrowing $3.9 million, obviously, we didn't have to stagger it. And it does free up some of the bottom line money starting in the next year or so.
Okay, and so you haven't made you haven't pulled anything else forward, it just frees up some,
Yeah, and if you look, because
Principal
I've been
here.
asked about it,
yeah.
this line at the bottom that I highlighted, that just gives you, it says hypothetical scenarios, JJ notes.
Yeah.
Just some ideas of what the borrowing cost could be for a potential improvement at the high school or something like that, if we were to fund it within there. It's gonna be a challenge, but I think it's something that we could potentially do. We've been building up this debt budget for 6 or 7 years now with the anticipation that we're gonna let's address the school's needs when it comes to elementary schools and probably a high school. I think Josette asked me some time ago, could we fund the middle school? Right now, we don't have the capacity to deal with a, $100 million, $100+ million project. But we could, I think, address some of the other schools in town.
Thank you.
And just to go back wicked quick to the, to talking about the comparison with the bids, and when I'm talking about when you look at this, and Jim will provide you with that information, but the level of granularity that I'd look for when you're trying to compare those and look at the base bids and the scope that we talked about, site prep, demo, utilities, landscaping, those items aren't broken out in enough detail to really get down into it. But, I mean, I'd be happy to look at that as well and talk it over.
Brian first?
Not close enough for me to be like, I'm telling you it's 6 million and it was 6.7 million, but we can look at it.
So I'm excited that there's fundraising meetings going on and taking place. That was questions I had back in the spring. So I'm excited that that's taking place prior to things really taking off here. Just since it's kind of from the spring till now, anticipated, if this passes, when will they start the work? When will the fields first be available for play?
I think we talked a little bit about that with our Weston Sampson, the architect we have on board. If we get this, it's anticipated if it passes, the selectmen will probably award the bid. I think probably the first meeting in November. That's right after town meeting, and award the bid, do the paperwork. I'm anticipating they're gonna kick it back to us. We'll have our council look over the contract. I would say that'll probably get done by Christmas. That's gonna be our goal there. And they may want to start the site real soon if we have a favorable winter. I know they want to. I spoke to RAD afterwards, and they're happy to have a project to keep their people working through the winter, and so they'd like to start it pretty soon. And it was about a year build out or so. That's about right? Yeah. So.
Thank you.
It looks like based on the debt that borrowing this 3.9 million is actually, it's going to cost us an additional 1.3 million in interest payments. Is that correct?
Sounds about right, yeah.
So then it'll be 5.3 total.
Yeah.
All right. I guess I voted against this in the spring, and I did it for three main reasons. One was the money. I thought it was too expensive. Two was the organization. I didn't think that there was any real organization in place to kind of back the needs of this field. And three was the fundraising. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about this over the last couple of months. I've been involved with conversations from many people in the room, and I really feel like it's moving in the right direction. And I want to thank you, Ben, for corresponding with me and with all my different questions. I'm still a little uncomfortable about the money, but it's better. But the work that you've done with both the fundraising and the organization has been spectacular. I've been very pleased with the emails that I've seen, so I want to thank you.
Thanks.
Andrew? No, I'm good.
I just wanted to make a comment piggybacking off of what Doug just said. If the total cost, including interest on the debt, is 5.3 million, I think it's important to contextualize this both for FinCom members, myself included, and for the public. Given our debt schedule here, the town's borrowing capacity over the next few decades, and when I look at how much debt is expected to roll off in this 15-year window that we are borrowing, it's roughly 2.3 million. So in some sense, about 43%, if you include the interest payments, about over 40% of the cost of this project is essentially just keeping our debt service ratio, our debt expenses level. Now, I just want to put this in context. These are last year's numbers, 2018, but Walpole's debt service ratio, the general fund debt service, was 2.8%, and the median town or city of Massachusetts was 4.6%. And it's no surprise to anyone who's followed town meetings over the last few years that we have a lower than average debt ratio or debt service ratio, and we have a higher than average free cash ratio. We're very conservative and prudent when we do these kinds of projects, as we built these several municipal buildings in town. So I just want to emphasize for those that are diving deep into the finances of this project, $3.9 million in borrowing, or 5.3 when you include the interest, should take into account the context that as a town, like any prudent company, is going to want to make investments that span decades, and not investing in both the quality of the life of the town and frankly kids and our sports activities would be, in my mind, a travesty. So I see this as a no-brainer. The financing of it, we had a debate at town meeting and it failed in the spring, but now it's scaled back. We listened to town meeting members, and I think that this is an even more prudent, frankly, in some sense, bare bones project, but we'll fundraise for the bathrooms and we'll fundraise for the playground. We can get that done, and I'm happy to help on that front. So thank you, Ben, for your leadership on this.
Thanks.
Good question, Jim. On the debt service schedule, we're showing it at 4%, and that's basically worst case scenario, Marilyn.
It's just a guess.
Yeah.
It's a conservative
Guess
number.
before things went down, so it's probably a little on the high side
Right.
right now.
Okay.
We won't know it until.
Until you actually go to market.
When are we going
Goes
out?
out to bid.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mark, yes.
So was in favor of this at the spring meeting at the finance committee. So I remember there were like four main issues. One was the cost, which I think we've addressed. The other one was the water issue, which I think has been addressed as well, about it being too close to other towns wanting to borrow it. The other one that may still be up for discussion is location. In my opinion, this is a great location, because just imagine having these fields in another place, and if it's off your street, the traffic that will be going by your street day in, day out, that's why I think it's a great location. So to me, the only other question would be if, for you, Mr. Chairman, if the public safety has had any change. They were in favor of it, they saw no concerns. Is that still their opinion, or has that changed at all?
Chief? Just while the chief's making his way up, as far as location, last week I took almost a whole day, went back and reviewed the ZBA file from 2001 and 2002. Because someone had reminded me, the high school field discussion came up about almost 20 years ago. It brought me, some old names came back that I haven't thought about in a long time, but the town vetted this in 2001. The ZBA actually made a decision to deny the permit for 5 fields at that location, to take 436,000 cubic yards out of the high school. And one of the big concerns was, how's it gonna impact the school, the kids when they're pulling in and out of school at the end of the day. One estimate had 278 trips per day for 6 straight months up and down Common Street. So it was vetted years ago, and I'm gonna provide town meeting with some of that information. But it was interesting, some of the same arguments that were made in the newspaper articles back then were being made at the spring town meeting. So just wanted to let you know, we have looked into that.
Yeah, and in that same vein as well, I would want to say that, the site itself, the land we purchased, is about 60 acres. And this project is going to be a little under 20 acres. So to the extent that there's land there that can be used for this purpose, it's barely been tapped. So this is certainly the smallest project that we could do that would be reasonable for the value. And to Doug's point, you certainly have the space to do a $20 million luxury facility if you want. That's not what this is. We have no interest in doing that. That's not feasible or reasonable. And so, we're starting small, and we're going to hopefully put these fields there to meet the need we have. And whether it's Upper Turco or other locations where we talk about maybe changing from grass to turf or doing these modifications, I think those are all great ideas, and they should all be looked into. But the pie we have now isn't big enough. So turfing over part of the grass doesn't make the pie bigger. We need to make the pie itself bigger so that people actually have the opportunity to use those fields. But go ahead, Chief.
Sure. So from my recollection, some of the biggest public safety issues were the Route 1A and getting access, especially for youth that are trying to get up there. And I think the other one was the prison being across the street. So to address the issue with it being on Route 1A, and having coached sports here in Walpole myself, not a whole lot of kids ride their bikes, to and from practice, especially in the fall when it gets dark early. Like football, for example, you'll see the kids out here practicing, and by the time they get out of practice, it's pitch dark out, and it wouldn't be good for them or safe for them to ride bikes back and forth anyway. So I know that the plan did include an access road that would come in through off of Winter Street, so that if kids were from that particular neighborhood, or people walking, riding bikes, that they would be able to access the fields that way. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend kids riding bicycles on Route 1A, but there is that other alternative, so I think that kind of satisfied that. The other issue with the prison, it's not like the movies. They don't open the gate when somebody gets out of Walpole Prison and they walk out the door and down the street. Usually people that are released from there are sent to pre-release in another location, or they're sent to halfway houses or other facilities. And the other issue is that most of the people at Walpole Prison are are in process there. So it's an intake station where they send them off to another location, usually Susan Baranowski or one of the other facilities. So most people are not released from the prison anyways. So I think we've kind of addressed those two issues. If there are other issues that there are any questions about, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
I did not related to this, I was just gonna go back as a butter of these fields. I think it's a great location because there'll be no traffic flow through my neighborhood or any of the neighborhoods. Off on 1A. But that's exactly what we need, because there are times my lot fields are cutting through, passing through neighborhoods, I'm creating traffic that shouldn't be there normally. This is gonna create a traffic flow on a state road at that point. But still within walking distance of, community, neighborhoods for kids and everyone else. So the locations in many ways couldn't be better for what we're
Sure,
trying to do.
and if you think of like East Street, behind Bird Middle School, that's controlled chaos down there every day, like soccer and baseball and that kind of stuff. So, in that sense, you could look at that, and that's kind of even a dangerous situation where you have a lot of cars, a lot of traffic, a lot of pedestrian and foot traffic and everything. So,
Solve that with the new middle school.
right.
Susan?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move favorable action on Article 3 in the total amount of $7,985,079.65. $4,035,079.65 to come from cash on hand. I can go break it down if you like. And the remainder from borrowing, $3,950,000.
Andrew seconded that. Just a couple quick questions. With regards to 1A, is there a possibility that we could configure left turn only lanes into the property in this current condition, or is that something that we can't get?
I don't want to answer that without having a traffic study. I haven't talked to them about that. You're saying left-hand turn to make another lane right there? on
Yeah,
Route
just
1A?
so that people aren't blocking as they're trying to
I
get.
can certainly try to do something there, but that would involve working with the state.
I wasn't sure if the road was, as it exists, is big enough to add a turn lane. Okay. Second.
That's a great idea.
Second is, how dry is the area right now? I'm just thinking of Tripoli and mosquitoes. Are we in a situation where the unused areas are going to be low-lying areas and wet, or is it going to be a dry?
Actually, the assistant town engineer pointed out to me about a month ago, it's really, if you go by and look at that pile, it's gone from so high, it's probably dropped, what, 5-10 feet, Chris, you think?
2, 3 anyway.
Yeah, at least 2 or 3 feet, just from all the water,
Settling.
dewatering itself right there. There are a couple of wet areas on the parcel, and they've actually designed stormwater management into it, a little retaining pond, so they've addressed that.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just like to make a quick comment. I really appreciate the work that has been gone into this proposal and continuing it. My comment is not regarding the fields portion, but the playground portion. And it's disappointing that we haven't provided all of our children in town an accessible playground, whether it was through this project or another project, and that it's required to go out to fundraising for the town to have this facility. It's disappointing that the town couldn't drive forward and offer that, which is something that, if you're a resident in town and you need that, that should be a right.
No other, no other questions or comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, 15-0-0. Just for the record, I know there's a lot of people in the audience, and it's not a public hearing, but a show of hands, how many are parents of kids that would end up using this field? Okay, we got about a dozen people. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, just one other thing, if I could. As Doug had said, I've talked with many of you about this, and I want everyone to know that I'm available, that I'm the point person for this, so if people approach you with questions that you can't answer, they can get me on Facebook, my email's out there, so please do reach out, because I just want to make sure we get all the information out to everybody. Thank you.
Jim, quick question. On the reappropriation, does that require two separate votes at town meeting?
No, it's all under one, because the reappropriation is just a majority vote, but because we're doing
The borrowing aspect?
The whole article's gonna be.
No, I mean, we don't have to vote the reappropriation
No.
to free up that money
No.
first? Okay.
In the motion that I provided to you, it specifies what year it was accepted at town meeting, so bond council is comfortable with the motion provided.
All right. Alrighty. So we are on to Article 8, stabilization. Stabilization, yeah, we're looking for 300 out of free cash.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find my notes on that one. 300 out of free cash. Let me see if I
We've got 292 for OPEB.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, Articles 8 and 9 relate to stabilization and OPEB. Stabilization, you may recall that I provided you folks with a number. We have roughly about $4.7 million in there, and this would lift us up to just over $500,000 in there.
Okay. Any questions or comments for stabilization? There being none, do I have a motion?
Motion to,
Favorable action?
motion for favorable action in Article 8, move 300,000 into stabilization, to the stabilization. From free cash.
Second.
Huh? 300,000 from, sorry. Favorable action for 300,000 from free cash to stabilization. Motion by Doug, do I have a second? Denny? Any other questions or comments? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained, 15-0-0. And OPEB.
And, Mr. Chairman, Article 9 relates to OPEB, the other post-employment benefits. That account has approximately 3.7 and change in it, and this would lift it up to just over $4 million. And I believe the recommended amount is $292,000.
Yep.
And the funding source is free cash.
Did everybody get the update from last year's meeting so that you were able to review the formulas that we put in place? Any questions or comments? Denny?
Motion for favorable action for Article 9 in the amount of $292,000 from free cash.
Second.
Seconded by Susan? Seconded by, oh,
Susan.
seconded was by Susan.
I'm sorry?
No, she was
Yeah.
trying to get them. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, 15-0-0. Next up, we have inclusionary zoning, Articles 14 and 15. There were some questions at one of our previous meetings about potential conflict of interest. Andrew sent a memo out, or we had a memo sent out on Andrew's behalf, identifying the potential of a conflict for interest or the appearance of conflict of interest. The state has ruled otherwise. The only recommendation was that he actually not chair the event in which we discussed, but he's an active participant and will be allowed to vote. If nobody has any other concerns, we will move forward.
Can we get more copies?
Oh, sorry. You know, I can email you.
Sure.
It's just, most of it's just a copy of these slides.
Bill?
Yeah. I'm just saying, just so, you know. Should we wait for the copies?
You can begin.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so, hi, my name is Audrey Grace. I'm the chair of the Walpole Housing Partnership. With me.
Hi, me again. I'm also on the Walpole Housing Partnership, and this article is being put forward by the board, so I'm going to help Audrey out if she needs it.
Sure. So next slide, please, if you may. So who is the Walpole Housing Partnership? We're appointed by the selectmen, and our mission is to help facilitate the availability of affordable housing in Walpole. So our role has been so far to update the housing production plan, which we have done, and we have a finalized version as of January of this year that's been accepted by the state. And now we're working on the implementation strategies set forth in the housing production plan. Next slide. So what is affordable housing? So affordable housing is officially defined as when households with an income at or below 80% of the median of the Boston metro area can obtain housing at less than equal to 30% of their income. So that's a lot of numbers, and there will be more numbers coming up too. But the key point is that affordable housing is not equivalent to low income or Section 8 housing. We are focusing on low and moderate income housing, but when we talk about affordable housing, it's really just 80% of the median income. So on the next slide, you can see what is AMI, or area median income. So an area median income is based on the metropolitan regional area. Walpole falls under the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy regional area. And so where our area median income is determined by every town in that area. So this is a chart from our housing production plan that was drafted by a consultant of the median income in this area, the greater Boston region. So you can see the 80% median right here highlighted in gray. And so for this region, if one person in this is I think based on 2018, I believe. If a number in the household is one person, they make $56,600. That would be 80% of the median income. And we've generally been focusing on this number in household family of 4, because that's what happens to be the general trend in Walpole. So we're looking at the $81,000 range for the 80% of our area median income. So when I use the term AMI, area median income, I'm using these numbers, the 80% median income there too. I would point out, however, that we're also housing there's a severe lack of housing for people who are on the 60, the 50, and the 30% of AMI. We, on our board, ex officio, is Denise Landry of the Walpole Housing Authority. She was able to pull a chart from us from how many people in Walpole are on the waiting list for the Walpole Housing Authority, which is low-income housing, right? And so a lot of those people, local people who are on that waiting list, fall closer to the 30%, right? So when we're talking about housing need, we're looking at people in 30%. All right, next slide. Again, this is just, this is kind of putting in the numbers there too. So if you think about that, these numbers are from an older presentation, but the numbers I want to highlight here is that when we say 80% AMI, when we talk about affordable housing, that's if you look at 30% of that, that's how much you should be spending on housing. So housing is considered affordable when all of us, no matter what our income, spend no more than 30% of our income on housing, which sounds like not a lot if you calculate your mortgage in Walpole too, but ideally that would be what the state considers affordable. So if we're looking at the 80% AMI based on these numbers in 2018, I think the other chart was based on 2016, which is the last data we had for the housing production plan. But the approximate rent for a 3-bedroom home would be about $2,100. And the approximate max sales price for a 4-bedroom home would be $286,000. The rent, I think it's on the next slide, you could see is significantly higher than what the average is in Walpole, but the median home value is significantly lower. Okay, so this is what is also in the housing production plan. The housing production plan is also available on our website in full, so I'm just pulling out some graphs and charts for you so to help you visualize what we're looking at here. So this is the income needed to purchase the median value of a house. And so when we talk about, to be clear, when we talk about the median home value or the income needed, this includes your mortgage insurance, this includes your utilities, it includes your, all of the sort of insurance payments, includes your tax payments that you have to make. That all is included in this home value too, and when we talk about the affordable number. So this is an interesting chart which shows basically what you would need for a down payment and then the potential interest rate and all of these included in the income you would need for there too. What the housing production plan found is that the median home value in Walpole is $435,200. And so for that, with the median household income of $99,102, a Walpole household with this income can only afford a median house if the interest rates remain between 4% and 5%, and they can make a down payment of 15% to 20%. So the median income family is $119,338. They can only afford a median home value with 10% down and a 5% interest rate, or 5% down with a 4% interest rate. So that's just helpful to see sort of the income you need here. Next slide. This is from the Mass Housing Partnership. We've been working with them. We have an agreement with them for technical assistance on all of these affordable housing goals and provisions. And they did an analysis of our median home sale price. And they found that our SHI is subsidized housing inventory. That's the percent of housing we have in Walpole that is considered, is under this, approved by the state as being part of our affordable housing, is 7.15%. Safe Harbor's at 10%. We need to aim towards 10%. But 1 in 3 households in Walpole are cost burdens, which means 1 in 3 of us in this town, maybe on this board, are paying more than 30% of our income on housing. 1 in 10 of us are actually paying more than 50% of our income on housing. So I think that's just a very telling number to show the need for more affordable housing in Walpole. A lot of people who live in this town are underwater or paying much more than they should on their housing here. Yeah, jump in if you want to. Next slide. So what we know, if when
Excuse me, just going
sure.
back to that other slide.
Sure.
Am I reading where, so the average house sale in Walpole, 2005 was 536,000?
That was the housing bubble. We're heading there now too, yeah.
And this is adjusted for inflation.
Oh yeah, this is these numbers are adjusted for inflation, so it's what it would cost now in 2005 numbers.
536 then.
It's
It
what
was the-
yeah, what the dollar would get you
Actually,
then,
536.
Time value.
which I think is very helpful for comparison too when they adjust it for inflation there, because otherwise you'd be like 1993 is 150,000, right? Okay. Do you have any other questions about that?
All set, thank you.
I have a question while we're on this slide. Subsidized housing inventory, that's subsidized is different from just affordable, right? You can be market rate and affordable.
So the subsidized housing, it can be, and the next slide will show you this too, but the subsidized housing inventory is all the things that the state considers our affordable housing. So the state has to approve these, so it has to be under some state-funded program. So these are, if you go to the next slide actually, these are housing that is funded by either a 40B, which is financed by the state and approved by the Department of Housing and Community Development. It could also be, in this case, we have Department of Mental Health and Department of Disability Services housing, so group homes that are monitored and managed by the state that are affordable to those living there are also part of our subsidized housing inventory. And the ownership units, I don't necessarily know what they're coming under here too, but there's a lot of federal programs that provide cost savings to people that would be counting in our subsidized housing inventory. However, if you have, for example, someone with a Section 8 voucher, they can go to any rental unit in town and live there with their voucher, but that unit wouldn't be considered affordable because the rent is not considered affordable and under the subsidized housing inventory. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of people in this town who may be under This is separate and apart from the Walpole Housing Authority, but if you have a Section 8 voucher, you're allowed to go to any rental unit and rent it, and then the voucher would make sure you only pay no more than 30% of your income. However, the rent is still over the price we would want for it to be affordable.
But if I wanted to build a building and for some reason I was able to do it super cheap and charge very low rent, and I'm not involved in any of these programs, that would not count towards that number, is that right?
No, because it would have to be, in order to count for the subsidized housing inventory, it has to be under a program by the state or municipality or the federal government, and it would have to be affordable in perpetuity. So you saying, I'm going to rent it for $1,000 because I want to increase my SHI, but next year I'm going to raise rents to $3,000, it's not what the state intended when making this program.
Thank you.
Right, another example of that would be if there's a block of, say, 30-something apartments that are existing now in town, and their current rental rate is below the percentages that Audrey described, and they're not signed up to the program, that doesn't count in our SHI. So in fact, we're talking about these numbers of units that count towards our SHI, which includes affordable and subsidized altogether. But in fact, there's many more than that in town that aren't involved in the program. So people who currently own apartments that might want to sign up for that program, there's an avenue for them to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, and so I just want to point out that there's other things that we currently in Walpole don't have 40R districts, which are basically mixed-use smart growth districts. These are what Massachusetts towns and cities are moving towards, these desirable living communities with both housing and retail. But that's something we can consider establishing. Community Preservation Act, CPA. That's also something that we don't have right now, and that's something that can help us increase our affordable homes in this town. A housing trust inclusionary zoning, so not to hide the ball, but that's what we're looking at right now. If you go to the next slide, it's just a quick little overview for those of you who are at town meeting of what we know from the housing production plan. We know that we have a significant increase in the 65-plus age cohort with a decline in those living under 24. That can tell you a lot of things. It can tell you that our population is aging. It can also tell you that people under 24 or younger people either can't afford to live here or not living here. We talked about the percent of homeowners paying over their affordability rate. We're at 7.1% of our subsidized housing inventory. In order to reach our 10%, now 10% is the magical number under 40B. Towns that reach their 10% are no longer susceptible to developers building 40B. Now, what's 40B? 40B is when a developer says, I want to build a development, whatever it is, and I will build 25% of those units as affordable. And the town essentially has to accept the program plan. The town has some wiggle room. It's not necessarily a free-for-all in terms of our zoning, but the intent behind 40B is to prevent this sort of snob zoning that a lot of cities and towns have had over the years. And it's the state's way of saying, like, look, we need more affordable housing in Massachusetts. We know there's a need out there too, so this is how we get to do it. And it also rewards towns that are working towards their 10%. So now that we have a housing production plan in place, if we increase our affordable housing stock slowly by 1% or 0.5%, we'll get safe harbor from 40B for anywhere from 1 to 2 years as we continue to work towards 10%. So I just want to say it's not like 10% tomorrow, or else this town's going to become something different than it is now. It's a slow process. It's an ongoing process. Yeah.
On social media, you may not have seen it. There's been
I try to stay away.
conversation about this. And for clarification, the 40B that's being proposed right now in South Walpole, 300 units. On social media, it has been stated that, in fact, that would make us reach our 10%. My question is, hypothetically, if that is true, which I don't know if it is or not, does the 10% rise now that you have an influx of a higher population? Does that automatically flip the numbers again that you have to continue to keep going? And in the process of this 40B, I'm just tagging on there, with the process of the 40B, if it goes through, which it probably will, does that in fact freeze us as a community from any further 40Bs going in our town on a temporary or permanent basis? I don't know if you have the answers or not, but
Yeah.
those are questions I'm curious about.
Okay, I can say the only thing I know about, and I think you're talking about the Summer Street 40B, I haven't received anything on it yet from Jim yet, so I don't know what stage they're in. The only thing I know, again, is basically rumors as to what's being proposed, but it seems like it's 240 rental units and 60 homeownership units. If 20% of those 240 rental units, 25% are affordable, then we will increase our affordable housing stock by 240 units. If for a rental unit, 25% of them are affordable at 80% of the area median income, the entire development counts towards our subsidized housing inventory, which is just what happened with the Moose Hill development. All of those units count, even though technically very few of them were actually affordable, which is an interesting part in the law. And then for ownership units, it's only those units that are affordable that count towards our subsidized housing inventory. So based on that, we would add 52 units to our subsidized housing inventory, which would help us with that, reach that sort of safe harbor provision. Currently, I have the numbers somewhere in here that it looks like it will give us safe harbor, and because we have a housing production plan in place for a period of time and of I think 2 years, because we've increased it that amount. But I would also point out that the downtown developments don't count in our denominator. So when those projects, I think it's a total of 822 units, including the age-qualified village that's in by Walpole Woodworkers, the 2 downtown developments, that will increase our denominator. And therefore, it will, we'll have to think about our 10% a different way. The 2020 census is also about to be administered, and once we get an accurate count of the number of households in Walpole, our denominator will increase. The housing production plan predicts that we'll actually need, our housing units will reach 10,000, which will mean we'll need an additional 358 units to make our 10%. And I would also say, though, that the 10% number is always something that you're striving for. Westwood, for example, is at 10%. They have a tiny town compared to ours, but they're at their 10%, yet they recently just passed an inclusionary zoning bylaw because they're seeing all this development, because they're seeing future growth, and they have that in mind going forward. Is that helpful?
Yes, and to directly answer the question, no, it won't get us to 10%. That new development will not.
But I'd have to get the exact number on the safe harbor, whether it's 1 or 2 years, but I think it would be a 2-year safe harbor with those units. But even then, we'd continue to strive. After 2 years, we'd get our census numbers.
So the apartments down here, I forget, what is it, 300 of them or so, they're not tied in to this?
They are not considered our 7.1%.
Yet.
Yet.
They're not tied into that 7.2.
They're not below income.
Well, no, so they don't count. They don't count in the housing.
They're not in the formula
subsidized
yet.
housing inventory, right? So they don't count as affordable. 0, none of them do, but they do count in the denominator. So they send us the wrong way.
But they haven't been counted yet at
Right.
7%.
Right,
It's
but no,
not
what
done.
I'm wondering is, we talked about, if say you build 100 apartments,
Mhm.
and 20% of them are affordable, all 100 apply.
Only if they're at 60% AMI, area, if
Right.
25% at 80%.
Right, this is a little far out.
Yeah.
What if the town of Walpole went and rented 20% of those apartments, and we, as a town, put them out at low income or with the AMI? Do we then get credit for having 300 units?
Well, sir, what you're talking about is a fund through the Housing Trust, which will allow us the money to do that.
No, but is that something that you could do? So the town goes in, buys them, keeps them low, but now we get credit for all the other 80%.
So yes, I have to, yes, with a caveat. The Walpole Housing Authority currently owns those units and rents them out under the Section 8 program. And they are governed by that program in terms of how they rent their unit and the lottery they run. Norfolk does a great job. They also have an inclusionary zoning. They also have a trust where they raise money and they buy units, refurbish them, and then sell them as affordable home ownership units. I don't know specifically off the top of my head of towns that buy them to rent. I don't know who would be the landlord in that situation, but I do know that towns are selling them as ownership units, which is helpful. But the Walpole Housing Authority does own that too, and they break even with their costs.
Ally?
You talked about safe harbor, and Moose Hill, 25% of those So all units counted?
Correct.
Right. So was it because of time frame? Why did that not put us in safe harbor before this Summer Street?
We didn't have a housing production plan in place.
When those were built?
Correct. When it's not when they were built, it's when the application came through.
When the application came through for Moose Hill, we did not have an approved plan at that time.
Yeah, so safe harbor only happens when you have a housing production plan in place. And then the other thing I'd point out that they found our current municipal resources were adequate to support the growth. I would note, however, that they actually considered the pending Fields project as part of our resources, our adequacy of our resources in terms of recreational facilities. And next slide, if you may. And just so you know that we haven't been doing this alone. I know I saw a lot of you at the listening session, but we're really trying to engage the community and get information to and from the community members on this, which is why you see this updated bylaw text. We really wanted the community to be part of this process. So we held, first we held 3 listening sessions in connection with the housing production plan updates. And for this particular bylaw, or these particular bylaws, we held 2 community listening sessions, and we also engaged the town board. So we were going to meetings, we were sending them information and getting their feedback. We also worked with, we also sent this information to developers and other people in town to say, if we're coming up with an inclusionary zoning bylaw, what would you like to see in it and what matters to you? And so we had one at the senior center and one at the library. The one at the library is filmed and televised, and you can see that online. And so we reached from there over 100 people in person. We also had an online survey, given that social media is very powerful in this town. We are actively soliciting information through Google Form online and to get a sense of what people care about, and we incorporated their feedback into this draft. Next slide. So what is inclusionary zoning? So an inclusionary zoning bylaw would require larger scale developments to include affordable units in addition to market rate units. So for example, if a developer were to build 20 apartments, the inclusionary zoning bylaw may require them to be 15% affordable. So then 3 of the units would be affordable. And so there's there's the housing production plan on page 42 also talks a little bit about this as well. Next slide. So talking generally about this inclusionary zoning, the way we drafted, all developments of 6 units or more would be required to include affordable units as follows. Now, this is slightly different than the draft you got Friday, because we're working with getting feedback from people and working with the Mass Housing Partnership. They recommended this, and I'll tell you why in a second. But so for 6 to 12 units, 10% have to be affordable. 13 to 20, we have 12.5%. And then a development of more than 20 units would be 15% affordable. Now, again, they must be affordable in perpetuity. There's other requirements of the Department of Housing Community Development that are required of these units, as in they must be the same quality, size, and character as the market rate units. And there's other provisions that help guide this process here, and we refer to those guidelines in the bylaw. The reason this is a slight change to the chart we had in the original is because when we talked to the Mass Housing Partnership, we based the original table off of Yarmouth's inclusionary zoning bylaw, and what they told us is that our numbers as proposed were basically creating a situation that more like what Boston has, where you have about 17% affordable, and the market would prevent sort of anyone from building under that. And if no one's going to build under this, they're going to build under 40B if they can. They also said that after discussions with Yarmouth, that Yarmouth is actually considering reducing their requirements to this 10% here. So we decided on this scaled up from 10 to 15%. All right, next slide. So I was told I need to use more pictures because there's a lot of numbers. So if you think about this, this is the smallest unit development. This is a 6-unit development. So of the 6 units, 10% would have to be affordable, and that's 1 unit. So the way it's written is that you round up to the nearest housing unit if it's more than a half, and you round down if it's less than a half. Next slide. If there's a 24-unit development, you can see this is, I was supposed to be working when I did this, so sorry, it's a little, I'll fix it later. But if you could see of a 24-unit development, there are 4 affordable units there too. So you could see how that works out there too. I'll work on the pictures for town meeting.
Color would be good.
I know, but Andrew told me not to use color. Anyway, next slide.
Listen to Andrew.
So the other thing we talked about, and this is one of the questions that came up, is that, you know, there was someone who worried about this being an unconstitutional taking or something, but when in consultation with the Mass Housing Partnership, and the other thing is we don't want to prevent all development. We have some great developers in this town we can work with. This is also a negotiating tool the town can use to work with developers about the size, shape, and location of these developments. So we don't want to prevent development at all. That's not the point of this. So we gave some incentives to developers, and in addition, that helps the argument against any sort of claim that this would be an unconstitutional taking. So first is a payment in lieu provision. So the payment in lieu provision will allow developers to pay they'll say, look, I don't want to build affordable units. It doesn't make sense for me economically. So they will make a payment or a sum to the town. At a formula that is based on the difference between the market and the conventional and the affordable unit. We've constructed the payment in lieu provision so it's responsive to market need. So, you know, as the market shifts, the housing goes up and goes down, the payment in lieu will still sort of track that. And the money will be designated for affordable homes. And we'll talk about that in the housing trust as well. That's part of the reason the housing trust is along with this, because the money would go into the housing trust. Although the other change that we slightly made and the recommendation of the housing partnership is removing the housing trust language from the inclusionary zoning bylaw, simply because if the housing trust doesn't pass, we wouldn't want a bylaw as written that where the money went to something that didn't exist. The other thing we provide for is off-site development. So for only home ownership units, not rental units. Rental units have to be on the site. That we say that the developer can construct the affordable unit at a location other than the proposed development. So in that 6-unit development, they would say, you know, I'm going to build 5 market rate units here, and the 6th one is going to be at a different site. A donation of land, so they can also donate land to the town of Walpole instead of building the affordable units. And then a density bonus is something that we added after intense discussions with the housing partnership. So a density bonus just means that depending on the level of affordability and as we have it constructed, that if you build a housing unit that's the 80% AMI, as I said before, that's kind of the highest you can go, then you can get 1 additional market rate unit for that development, and then you get a reduced setback requirement to fit in that additional market rate unit. If you go as low as 30% AMI, and we know that the town needs 30% AMI, which is who is on the waiting list for the housing authority. As you can see from Facebook, that 80% AMI is really not affordable. You know, $2,000 a month is really not affordable to a lot of people. That if you go down to 30% AMI, then you can build 3 additional market rate units and an additional further reduced setback requirement, which we have at 20%. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I have 3 questions.
Sure.
The first is, if a developer comes in and says, I'm going to build 12 units, and so a certain percentage of them have to be affordable, could that developer make those affordable units different, smaller, or do they have to be the same as the others?
And they have to be the same. Under the state regulations, they have to be substantially the same. So, you know, and when you're building a community, you don't want like.
I'm just asking the question.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they have to be the same.
The next question I have is the donation of land. So if a developer did that and donated land, how would that be helpful to the town?
So if it's something that they donate land that the town could therefore raise funds or work with another developer to build up that land for affordable housing. So we don't have a lot of land in Walpole that's suitable for development.
So who would decide if the land being offered was worthy of the town taking?
Great question. The way we have it constructed is we call it the special permitting authority. So that's either the zoning board of appeals or the planning board, and with approval by the board of selectmen, they would decide.
Okay, and then if this donation were approved, who would build the properties? I mean, we don't have staff to do that.
No. So it would be something that we'd incentivize. We'd say to a developer as an incentive that we'd work with them to build up that property.
So we would give a developer the property, basically.
Yeah. Yes, essentially.
And my final question has to do with the density. So again, you have a situation where a developer comes in and says, well, I'll build additional market rate units. I want to build additional, but and then look at the reduced setback. But how does that impact the neighboring residences? So I'm particularly concerned about East Walpole, where I live, because I know that that's a very vulnerable area for this kind of thing to happen. And so what protection would be afforded to our current residents?
Yep, sure. So all, the density bonus is always at the discretion of the zoning board of appeals, and the planning board is written here too. So they would have to approve this. And so their role is to ensure that it is in line with the character of Walpole. And there's also the maximum setback requirement as we have is 20%. And as with any property, there would be notice to the butters about a potential project going in, so they'd be able to respond.
So it wouldn't be of right, it would be subject to a special permit?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and to that point, Susan, you know, when they come in with a 40B special permit now, and if anybody listened to any of the board's meetings that we had and the discussions we had in our response letter, which was relatively limited and something of a Hail Mary when we go through that process, that's very little say. So what Audrey just described is almost a fantasy idea that's actually perfect, because we want it to go through the prescribed process where abutters can come in and have a say. The ZBA looks at it, the planning board looks at it, the board of selectmen looks at it, and that's the correct process that it should go through.
Yeah, I just want to, as a point of information, I want to understand,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, and I just
how it
want
would
to, I just
work.
want to draw a parallel for people between that, which is what we're pursuing with this plan, and what is currently happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to make a clarification on exactly how these density bonuses work. A lot of people may hear density and, you know, think that's a dirty word, and they think that, using Audrey's example from earlier, that if there's a 24-unit proposed development, well, would the density bonuses we would let them make it 80 units? No, it's a maximum of 3 additional units, right? So if the inclusionary zoning bylaw requires the 24-unit complex already to have 4 affordable units, we would allow the developer to build up to 3 more additional, not 4 more, but 3 more additional market rate units. So you're looking at moving from a 24-unit project to a 27-unit project. So these density bonuses, I just want to clarify, is not to like triple the number of units. It's a slight increase to offset to, frankly, as a negotiating tactic, given the exaction that you could argue legally that you're requiring this developer to build some affordable, it has to be a give and take, right? So that flexibility, I think, is really key. Well, we heard when we spoke to the business community, that means reaching out to developers, but also when we reached out, and by the way, clarification, I'm on the Housing Partnership Committee with Ben and Audrey, but when we reached out to developers, when we reached out to the Economic Development Commission in this town, the big thing we heard was, okay, if you're going to do this, we may be opposed to it, but if you're going to do this, you should have density requirements, because that's just like the fair trade-off when it comes to not deterring development from these projects happening. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that density doesn't mean, you know, Queens-style apartment buildings. It just means a slight increase in the number of condos or apartments or whatever.
Lisa?
Hi, through you. Do these incentives exist in other inclusionary zoning bylaws in, say, Norfolk and Westwood? And have you seen them carried out in other towns, for example, particularly the donation of land? Does it work?
Thanks for the question. I don't know specifically about the donation of land. The payment in lieu exists in most, and density bonus exists in the majority of inclusionary zoning bylaws in other towns. And I know that actually from Yarmouth that the no developer has taken advantage of the payment in lieu provision. I don't know specifically about other towns what they have taken beyond the density bonuses. That seems to be what the developers appreciate. But I can look into that for you.
So where did you come up with the other 2 incentives, the off-site development and the donation of land?
Oh, okay, so those are just generally included in most inclusionary zoning bylaws too as incentives. If you don't want to do the payment in lieu, then you can do the off-site development, donation of land. But what we're really looking for, again, these are all negotiation techniques that we can use to help work with developers, engage those in our community. A lot of the developers also live and work in this community too, so they're part of our community as well. And they want to see the best for this town. A lot lot of them do. So just ways we can work together on this.
Thank you.
Kathleen?
Through you, Mark. Audrey, if the trust, I know I may be jumping the gun here, so you can tell me to hold off on this, but if the trust weren't to pass, what would happen to the payment in lieu?
So it would go, I believe, into the general fund. I don't know if you know, but it will still have to be designated for affordable housing. It will just be part of either the general fund or free cash, one of those.
Goes to the general fund, and then it becomes free cash, and then you guys, or the town meeting would have to reappropriate it.
But you don't need to for.
Right, so it would be marked for affordable housing somehow?
That was my understanding.
That's why I didn't answer. I don't know the second half of that, if it specifically would be legally restricted.
or not.
I know the intent would obviously be for that, but I don't know if you'd have to do it. I know the intent would be there.
Okay, thank you.
Josette?
Quincy has this program, and Quincy's in a unique position in comparison to Walpole in that they do have land. So they have the in lieu payment, and they accumulate the money, and then the town builds the units, and they have a lottery system for the residents for it. And it's basically for people that are making between $40,000 to $65,000, $70,000. Not your Section 8 housing, but your young people starting out or people with different jobs that are not paying them six figures. So they found, I've spoken to a couple of people that have been coming to the center with the sheriff, and they don't call him selectman over there, there's another term for him, but he's on the board over there, and that's what they do, and they found it very successful because the builders at one point thought they just owned the town, and now they have to contribute to the town, and the people that need the housing, which are your young professionals, just starting out, your teachers and such, they now have an opportunity to purchase a very good piece of property to start off, which is, I think, the ultimate goal, really.
Okay, so.
Hang on, one more, Mark.
Sorry.
So inclusionary zoning, what's the goal?
Well,
Is it to
so,
add
next
more
slide.
affordable housing to a town, or is it to help a town address its 40B issue?
Both. So the purpose.
So let me just, I'm gonna be quick with this. So with the inclusionary zoning, how many towns have adopted it so far?
Oh, a lot. I have that in here, sorry.
Okay, so with those towns, how many of them, what's been the increase with the 40B? Have they gone from 7 to 8%? Have they gone from 8 to 10? Because with the requirements you have, like if you're doing 6 units, it's 10%. I mean, then you're kind of treading water. If you go up to 20, then you're up to 12%. You know, you're not really making big inroads to the 40B number that I can see. So for me personally, I look at this, that I went to your meeting in the, at the library, and now I'm going through this. And frankly, I think it's really hard to follow. This whole thing is very cumbersome. I'm in favor of it, but I'm thinking, you know, here's the goal. Here's what the results are for towns that have adopted this. Because there's an umbrella, the state controls this, so it's not like you can go off the reservation and do whatever you want. There are guidelines, so there's protections in it. And then I'm also interested to know, like, you know, what's been the impact of Walpole? For instance, these units up here, if I'm a town meeting member, you know, why aren't any of them under the 40B? And why is this one out in Moose Hill a 40B? And just like a cognizant example of, see, if this had been in place, we could have done this. There, because I just get, as your presentation, if this is what you're presenting at the town meeting, it's just really hard to follow. And my concern is that all these different items, you're gonna lose it because people are gonna take it and you're gonna go down all these different paths, and it's gonna be tough for the town meeting members to understand, you know, what is the real goal of this thing and why they should be supportive.
Sure, yeah. So I think I can answer part of that, but I think that you're giving us some good recommendations for town meeting. But the goal is to make incremental change. Like we were saying, the safe harbor, we get safe harbor when we make that incremental change. And again, the goal is not to stop all development because we know we need affordable, whether it be a new development or rehabilitating existing units, they would fall under this too. So the goal is not if we had an inclusionary zoning bylaw that said you have to make 100% of your units affordable, no one would develop in this town, and it wouldn't help us meet our goal because nothing would move forward, right? And so it really is about incremental change. The other thing about, I can say that if we had this in place when those developments downtown were proposed before the zoning board, they could have done something to require affordable units in those developments. Because they are large developments, they would have fallen under this inclusionary zoning bylaw, and 15% of them would have been affordable. And assuming there was a housing production plan in place, I don't know that when the old one expired and whether it was after this, we would have been in safe harbor had we had an inclusionary zoning bylaw. Is that helpful?
You have strong 40B requirements that it's the 30, 40%, and the developers.
I'm sorry, 34%.
No, just, you were talking about, if your percentage is too high, the developers aren't gonna wanna come in and develop.
Or they just go 40B.
Right. Which they go 40B, so you're addressing your 40B issue versus, which is also tied into the low income.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering, as a resident of Walpole, would I be so upset if big developers said, I'm not coming to Walpole because you have pretty strict?
Well, no, they'd still come, but they do it via 40B. So they wouldn't, they would be able to build, I don't know, I know they have to comply with some of our zoning laws, but they would be able to build it in districts that wouldn't otherwise allow for multifamily development.
Right, but if you have to go 40B, eventually, we want to get to the 10%.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like pay me now or pay me later. Put in really restrictive ones, we get to the 10% a lot faster than if we go with a 10 or a 12%.
What I think you're here, so if we do nothing and we have a bunch of 40Bs come in and build them wherever they want, yes, we would reach our 10%. But we wouldn't have any say in where those developed or where they were developed or how they were developed. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and and so part of the program is to get, and they talked about it a bit at the planning board, but to get into a LIP sort of initiative.
A LIP is a friendly 40B, a local initiative. So that's when there's a process we can put in our zoning bylaws that's a streamlined permitting process for those developers who want to do the 25% affordable. It makes it cheaper for them to go through the process, and it allows them some more streamlined to build these 40Bs. Sorry.
Right, no, and so that's where we want to get. We want to be working with developers. So yeah, we could close it off. We could just say, we're going to take 40Bs until we make it, and then it'll be fine. And it might be fine for a year, but then we're back where we started at square one because of the pace of building in the town. So what we want to do, and one of the purposes of this that isn't listed here is looking down the line and saying, if we can make these relationships with developers who are willing to work with us, then we don't have to worry about 40Bs 1, 2, 3 years as our inventory continues to rise. We've developed these relationships with folks in the area who will develop and will negotiate with us and play by the rules, and we have options for them to do so. So, I mean, the point's well taken that we would get there through 40Bs. But the idea is this allows us not to. And it's sustainable, into the future. We develop these relationships and we can move forward.
Again, this is just a recommendation. It would be really interesting to have a slide that said, these 10 towns implemented this. They started with this percentage from the 40, and here's where they are today. Just to see, people to be able to visualize what the impact is.
Okay, so next slide, I can go through this a little bit.
Mark.
Well,
Lisa.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thanks. Mark, I'm with Mark on this, fully support it. Terrible presentation. The tweets coming in are saying this is very dry.
I am very sparkly, by the way.
We love all the thought that you've put into this, but before you even go to your next slide, I will simply read it to you, Mark. An IZB will prevent Walpole's subsidized housing inventory, SHI, who cares about SHI, An IZB will prevent Walpole's subsidized housing inventory from declining as new housing is built. Period. That's why we need this, because when new houses are built, we don't have anything in place. And we keep going farther and farther behind in reaching our subsidized housing inventory. That is absolutely why we need an IZB, because we're falling behind, and all these big things that are in place. And Audrey said this just a minute ago, but you don't just use a lot of numbers, Audrey, you use a lot of words. So I would say this shouldn't be the second point on slide 16. This should be the first point on slide 1. If we don't have an IZB, if we don't have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, stop with all the initials. If we have no inclusionary zoning bylaw, we'll keep falling behind in our subsidized housing inventory. And then everything else can be, when people ask questions, you can say, this is how we define affordable, but we know there's a need. So I really don't think you have to sell that. But thank you. It's a great, great bylaw, if we can get to slide 16.
Just one slide.
We have
that's
4
all.
more people to ask questions. I would say to a follow-up to her number 1 point to be on your slides, and the second is, the farther we fall behind, the less control we have on getting there to the affordable housing goal. Okay, and then Ally?
3 things I think that were kind of brought up a little bit. I was able to attend last week too, so hearing this the second time gives more clarity, but as a whole entire town meeting, this is going to bring a lot of questions, and we have to find a way to make this more understandable, because hearing it a second time, like Mark said, I'm like, okay, I remember this, it's sinking in, and this is going to be really difficult to really explain well at town meeting.
Plus, I'll probably get 5 minutes, right?
Yes, so that is a concern, because as we know, many town meeting members, they are not able to watch us live stream, they're not able to follow up on the streaming videos before town meeting, so their information is what's right in front of them. So we're gonna really need to clarify this for.
And I should say, sorry to interrupt, we will have a thorough FAQs page that we're going to submit with the RTM packets as well. So we'll have a little bit more information for town meeting as well.
One point I wanted to do too was the 25%. So I think Ben just very briefly mentioned the incentive for builders to go to that 25% with that streamlined zoning, because then you said the entire unit then adds to our SMI.
For rentals, yep, for rental units.
At this point in the 2 years, but you know what I'm saying.
Subsidized housing inventory, yes.
So I think that's a point that kind of gets lost. Our current housing, you mentioned that there's many units in town that if they apply to be part of state program, is there any initiative to try to reach out to current landlords in town to get them into programs to help with our numbers?
So the mass regs generally only permit new or refurbished developments to apply to be part of that.
Okay, but I'm assuming that's kind of on the housing partnerships radar if any of these units are renovated and such.
Well, yeah, absolutely if they're renovated, but I guess at the Walpole Housing Partnership, we're not in the business of finding landlords and asking them to register with the state, but.
It just was kind of one comment that I didn't hear the other night, saying that there are many more units in town that are at the rate, but because they're not part of state programs, they're not counting towards our numbers.
Right.
Yeah, so it would be requiring a developer to enter the program and refurbish or rebuild their housing unit, and then they would have to agree to have their units affordable in perpetuity to be part of our subsidized housing inventory.
Again, it was just something that you brought up that I don't remember hearing or thinking too much about last week. And our AQVs, are these in line with what we did at last town meeting for inclusionary zoning, the numbers? Off the top of my head, I can't recall what we were at 10% for units, and is this in line what we did for our age qualifying units, inclusionary zoning?
I'm trying to remember because it was 10 and 15%, depending on the size of the land area. But the percentages are in range with that too. In addition, there was some sort of density bonus there as well. But this would apply to AQVs as well. So regardless of whether it meets that land area, this the IZB as written would apply to any AQV.
So would they be a conflict of what we voted on last year?
I don't think so. They would be similar to
These
that.
were
I don't know.
superseded?
I just wanted to clarify that Article 20 from last spring town meeting changed the bylaws for AQVs, where it said we encourage, but not require.
Can I just say for those listening, AQVs are age qualified, so these are 55-plus housing. They're a subset of the bylaws that is separate and apart from other zoning, so it's easier to change those as a unit.
So this change we made, town meeting did in spring, it went from encouraging 15% to be affordable to requiring 10% be affordable for the 15-acre projects. And
Okay.
then for the 10-acre projects, I don't know off the top of my head now, I'm just looking at it, what impact it had, so I don't know if that helps.
I just feel like many surrounding towns are really as well looking at the AQ age qualifying units as being part of the affordable housing project.
Yeah, yes. So that is depending on the size of the acreage, and this would be depending on the size of the development.
And again, where I feel like we're a little bit behind the game, as we have 3 pretty significant age qualifying units, the same as, 300 age qualifying, 300 downtown, over 600 units, and none of them are counting.
Bethany?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the presentation pointers. I hate to see you get rid of any numbers because I love the numbers, but when you do put together, let's say, the USA Today version, I think the one number that is important to keep in there is when what we're talking about with affordable housing. I don't think people have any idea. I think people think these are really, really affordable, like that they're really inexpensive housing, and I think that needs to be cleared up early on in the presentation.
Yeah,
But
and
you did
maybe
hear
as
about-
part of every slide, I'll have it in the bottom as well.
Right.
No, I mean, and I think, but again, the housing need is for units that are more affordable. So, which is why we are encouraging that density bonus for people who want to build at 30%. And even the 30% AMI is not, I mean, that's not, that's not necessarily a low-income housing depending on the size of the development, right? So, yes, thank you.
Susan?
Through you, just to echo some of what's been said, I think when you streamline your presentation, the focus that I would choose if I were in your shoes would be control. So I think people like to feel personally that they have more control and that the town has more control over what happens. So I think if you focus on this is an effort to take control and be proactive, using the example of all this building that we weren't able to harness any portion for affordable housing. And that's a great example of not having control. And without having a proactive control program in place, then we are at the mercy of 40B developers. So to me, that's a selling point, which is why I asked the series of questions I did, including the one about the being able to change the setbacks. Again, control. People want to know, oh, okay, it won't be the developer just doing it as a matter of right. There'll be 3, 4, 5 bodies looking at it as well. So people, I think, are comforted by knowing that there are controls in place, and I would stress that if I were in your shoes.
Do you want me to bore you some more? Next slide. This one's even more boring. Housing trust. So the housing trust is Article 15. Is it okay if I talk about them as a unit, or I don't know if you want to talk about 14 first, but or do you want me to wait on this, or?
Actually, Brian,
Yeah, first off, I just want to applaud you for this. I'm in favor of it. I do have a couple questions here. If Summer Street moves forward, at what point would those start to count? Is it when the plan's approved, when the building starts, when they start being occupied?
I have to check. I believe it's when the building permit is pulled, because Moose Hill counted before they were done, but I can check on that too.
Okay, thank you. And then, of towns that already have this in place, are they seeing any trends with the developers of going smaller? Like only
Oh.
building 2 to 5 units versus getting to that magic number of 6?
That's a really good question. I can ask, yep.
Okay, thank you.
So just on a procedural question, you've covered now Article 14. This is now conversation at 15. Do we want to discuss 14? Do we want to go through this all at once?
Actually, I'm gonna just quickly check with Jim, where the language that was presented last week and has been updated as of tonight, town council hasn't weighed in on the actual verbiage, so therefore, if we vote something, we're voting it on verbiage that may be changed. So if anything, I'd do a recommendation at town meeting, and then we would reconsider at a future date, but I'd like to get through the presentation, and we can take our votes.
Perfect, I just wanted to make sure.
So my only point about that is this language is taken from other towns' bylaws. So whether it's Yarmouth or Belmont, the state has approved this kind of language as a zoning bylaw before. So, I'm not a lawyer, I of course want town council to weigh in on this, but if it's taken from another town, maybe that changes your calculus in terms of how comfortable you feel, but I'm fine to wait too.
That would not change my calculus.
Let's get through the presentation for 15 also, and then we can...
Let's slog on through.
Oh, come on. Come on.
Keep going, Audrey.
You don't understand how many, I was working today,
excellent
throwing
work.
this together for y'all.
Yes, it is excellent work. That should not be
We're
lost.
just going to work on the,
Okay, videos,
we're going to get
pictures.
this down to just a few slides. This is great
Dance moves?
prep detail.
Yeah, if you could sing.
And then we'll get you into the executive summary version that you
Okay,
need for that.
I got it. I have a very confident singing voice. Okay, so housing trust. A housing trust is governed by Mass General Laws, Chapter 4455C. What you have in front of you is essentially that statute with a few provisions about, just general provisions that was in another bylaw that we got from the Mass Housing Partnership. So essentially, this is a body. We're creating a municipal body that can help manage these funds. And it's not just inclusionary zoning bylaw funds that can go into it. There's other towns, like, for example, if we decide to adopt Community Preservation Act funds, that would go into the housing trust. It could also be cell phone tower payments. That could go into the inclusionary zoning bylaw, the housing trust. And I have a chart on that coming up, and a picture. But next slide.
Stay tuned.
And then the Mass Housing Partnership, this housing toolbox has tons of information on the housing trust, and they have offered to come in and do technical training for the housing trust. Once established, they will come in and do training for you as the FinCom for what this is and how it could be managed, and they are our partner in crime in all of this, and they have willingly offered to come in to help us with this. But essentially, it's just a way that we can collect funds, and this is an example of what we can do with those funds. So in addition to providing financial support or incentivizing developers or increasing affordability of new housing partnerships, we can also rehab properties that we already have. And we know from the senior listening session that the seniors who live there in Walpole Housing Authority are desperate for someone to come in and fix things. There's elevators that are broken, there are roofs that are falling apart, there's leaking. We can use this money to help them fix up the homes that they already live in for the people in our town who need it the most. So next slide. Okay, so this is how the trust is funded. So you can see, here's a picture. I know it's not the cutest one, so these are just generally what we can have here that can help fund this housing trust. So if it's something that once the municipal body gets established and they create their budget, they can consider other ways we can fund this trust in addition to these payment in lieu provisions. But currently, the only money that we have anticipated to go into this trust fund would be those payment in lieu provisions. And so next slide. The statute requires a minimum of 5 trustees. It is also a municipal body, so it would be just like the FinCom, just like the Walpole Housing Partnership. It would be subject to open meeting laws. It would, the minutes and agenda would be published. There would be conflict of interest rules. They would have to require procurement laws. All of that applies to this trust. The way we have written there is we have 5 trustees. The law requires at least one of them to be a member of the Board of Selectmen. And we have it as the remainder are appointed by the Board of Selectmen. But there could be more there too. So I know there was a lot of feedback in the listening session as to who's going to monitor, who's going to manage it. If you would like, as the Finance Committee, we can write that a member of the Finance Committee is a member of this housing trust, as if you want more work to do. That's something if you want to have a say in how this housing trust is spent. Although the Mass Housing Partnership, I will say, cautions too many members, this is a board that has to remain nimble. They have to be able to meet regularly, and they have to, or as the money comes in, and they have to be able to make decisions on how to spend it. There is oversight, just like procurement laws, just like you can't spend money without approval as to how they purchase or receive land as well. They'd have to go through all those sort of procurement procedures. So I know there was a concern about you didn't want a member of the Housing Trust driving by your town, scoping out your house for.
Mr. Chairman, just ask a question. So with regards to this board that will be doing this, so from a revenue standpoint, are they able to generate their own revenue? Like there's several ways that you can collect revenue. They have to go and get the town meeting permission if they want to change. Instead of just a developer donating money to the trust, they decide we're going to put a tax in, or we're going to change something else. Can they do that by themselves? So that's control to get to the town. Then if the board is together, it has $1 million, and then it can decide how it wants to spend the money. I mean, assuming everything is appropriate, but whether or not I'm going to buy land on XYZ street and work with the developer to put in so many units, or I'm going to take so much of the money and go to senior citizens and fix up their homes, they decide how they want to spend that $1 million. And the town doesn't have, like, I can't come to you and say, no, we don't like the way you're planning to spend the money, you have to change it. They're independent?
Well, unless it goes under the procurement laws or the conflict of interest laws, and they are independent, although they would be, just like you, subject to the open meeting laws. They're also, because there's a member of the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen has the power to remove members for cause, they are monitored in that way.
So is it majority? So I guess what I'm wondering is this is a pretty powerful board. I mean, that the authority that they'll have access to this funding, they're able to make independent decisions, and so the only control mechanism then is when they come up with renewal, the selectmen can say, no, we're not renewing you, we're renewing somebody else. But they're independent.
Right, so just like the Walpole Housing Partnership or the FinCom as well, yeah.
Right, but they have money. They can spend this money as they see, and they can spend it where and how they think it. There's no requirement. In other words, I can't put a restriction on you that says, all you can do is use the money to fix up people's homes, or you cannot buy land. You're able, under the state statute, to spend the money how the state says you should be able to spend the money.
The enumerated ways they can spend the money are in the statute and in the under powers of the trustee, and what they can do or what their limits of their power are.
That's your authority to spend. The town cannot come in and put additional restrictions upon that.
Some towns do limit the powers of the trustee through this act too. Yeah.
Okay. Fine, thank you.
Gisette?
Audits? Is there an audit of the funds?
Yes.
And stuff? We expect you to be very trustworthy, but there should be oversight by somebody or?
Yep, there's an annual audit that's required by statute.
And does this, you say you have a board of selectmen who has to be a member, but how does this come under, or does it come under the town administrator? Does he have any say into how anything goes here?
So some towns have the town administrator as part of the board, either ex officio or not. We can add that in. Some of them do, so right now as constructed, it's under the Board of Selectmen right now.
Under the bylaws, under section J, does have the annual audit, but it says that the trust books and records are maintained by the town finance director. So the record keeping is going to be done at town hall. So before a check goes out the door, it's gonna go through somebody at Town Hall first.
Yeah. I mean, it also is very open, and the way the Mass Housing Partnership recommends that, it recommends that they make all of their books open to the public on their website. Sorry.
And is everything, excuse me,
Good, yeah.
is everything voluntary? Like, everybody on the FinCom, we volunteer. So it's not like, are these going to be paid people, or it's all volunteer?
Yes, it's all volunteer.
Susan?
Just as a point of information, maybe not for you, but for anyone. When you're a trustee, you are bound by fiduciary duty. So, and that is, that is enshrined in statute. And it's black letter law, so that you couldn't have people running off half-cocked doing things that are not within the scope or not for the benefit of the mission that they're entrusted to proceed with. So I think there are going to be, I think it'll get down to a situation where you might have, as trustee, made a different decision or a different vote, but I don't think you're going to have people running off half-cocked, just spending money willy-nilly. That would not be permissible under any trust formation that could be established in this Commonwealth or in this country, actually.
Mark?
Just one of the, I think it's the website you put up there, I went in and read this, the state comes out with the whole housing trust, how these are set up, and it's very, very interesting, and it gives you a lot of examples of the towns, and one of the things that struck me about it was, some of these towns are collecting millions of dollars in the fees, and then what many of them do, they'll have a part-time, like, budget or planning person, because this isn't like the finance committee where you meet once in a while. I mean, this becomes a very active, dynamic type of committee where someone really has to be on top of it day in, day out, because money is changing hands, so that's why I was trying to highlight, like, this isn't just a semi-dormant committee. This is a very active environment where you'll probably be eventually, probably the trust pays for it, but eventually, because you're hiring lawyers, accountants, because you're very independent, it's not the town people that'll be doing the work, the trust will have to hire itself.
I just would say that the trusts that have $1 million are not, it's not only because of inclusionary zoning payment in lieu. In fact, most of that money comes from other sources. The biggest funding to these are Community Preservation Act funds, which we don't currently have. And then any sort of operating costs would come under the trust, would come out of the trust budget itself. Or trust instrument.
Just other than the CPA, there was like a beehive of different funding sources. Are those already within the town budget sources of revenue, or are those areas that are not already utilized by the town in some other way?
If you want to go back, currently we don't have a housing trust, so the only thing, and nothing goes into the housing trust right now, is written.
Right, but I'm just asking if those things on the outside, are they already sources of revenue or income for the town, other than the CPA?
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess my follow-up question is, other than the CPA, that's a potential source. You mentioned prior that the payments in lieu from the towns you've spoken to, haven't really been utilized. So it just doesn't seem to me that there's actual funds going to come in the near future.
Right, unless we write it in or adopt Community Preservation Act funds.
Did you say payments in lieu haven't been utilized, or the land swap hasn't been utilized?
Well, in Yarmouth, the payment in lieu hasn't been utilized, but that is not necessarily true for every town.
Oh, it's just Yarmouth.
Yeah. Yarmouth is the example that we use, or is the text that we use in our bylaw.
Similar to Sean's question, so who would determine if CPA became something, or if tax title sales became, does the trustees determine that, or town meeting members? Okay, so you would make a recommendation, the trustees would make a recommendation, is that how that would all come about?
Well, in my opinion, the CPA, that would need to come from the Board of Selectmen. If that's something that the board wants to pursue, they'll propose it to town meeting. About 5 to 7 years ago, the CPA did come up with town meeting. It didn't go anywhere. They had Seth Green, who was the head of that state group at the time, come in and talk to town meeting. It just didn't go anywhere. and
And
tax
that,
title
and it has to
stuff.
go to the voters also in the ballot.
Yeah, and tax title, currently, that, again, that's with the finance director, because she's a treasurer tax collector. We're dealing with a few here and there, and that just goes off for auction. The one I'm thinking of is one on, in Dutton Park. It's a house that the town's taken ownership of. We have to wait a whole year, but that house is probably gonna go back out to auction. We're just gonna auction it off, and the funds are gonna go back into the general fund.
Thank you.
Denny?
So, if 14 gets passed, so 15, just think how I want to ask this question. So 14 has a particular purpose, which we stated was the exact line of the goal. An inclusionary zone will prevent Walpole's subsidized housing inventory from declining as new housing is built. So that is the goal of 14. 15 is just to set up if we get funding that comes in. But we can, the two are not, they can be, 14 can be passed if 15 is not passed, we're still fine. Funding, if any of the funding comes in, it would go into the general fund and go through the regular town meeting process like we're doing now, correct?
Yes, but then we would have no one in charge of helping use those funds for affordable housing specifically.
What about this committee that exists now to recommend to the town meeting how it would be?
Oh, us? Oh, no, we
applied?
can't manage funds.
You wouldn't manage funds, the funds would be managed by the town. Be the recommendation on how to, if the town wanted to use the funds.
Yeah.
Like we just went through tonight with capital budgets.
Yeah, the state's very specific about how it needs to be set up, about how you would need to have a trust funded. It either goes through the town or you create the housing trust.
Yeah.
And we just got a lot of feedback early on in this process. People weren't comfortable, with the town having that money, handling it, setting it to the side, and there was a lot of negativity and doubt surrounding that. And so we said, well, people do this as well. So that was our answer to that concern, was, well, then we'll have 5 people, it'll be transparent, open meeting laws, everything's out in the open. So to answer your question, no, you don't need it. Those are really the 2 options.
This is also like 2 full-time jobs. So the Housing Partnership has one goal and one drive and one mission, and the Housing Trust is a completely different one. So they would, and sometimes be and so it doesn't mean that a member of the Housing Partnership shouldn't be on the Housing Trust, but they are just 2 different.
No. I was just trying to make sure I understood it.
Yeah.
Way out hearing things, and my initial reaction is, I like 14, I don't like 15. We don't need another government agency in this town collecting money and doing things. I'd rather see it differently. I don't know that answer yet, but that's my initial thought. So it's interesting to hear what you said is, you created 15 because you were hearing feedback the other way, so that's good to know.
Yeah, it's really a personal opinion thing.
Yeah.
Whether you're comfortable with the town handling that or not. And then the trust then has the leeway, because the town is just gonna collect funds, aggregate it, set it to the side, and we'll have to keep an eye on it and use it for its purposes. But these folks, if we shape the trust, they'd be active, right? They'd be going out and hopefully pursuing different avenues to get additional funds, whereas the town would basically just be a bank.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that has me more concerned. So, that's good to know.
Following up on that, do you happen, or can you find out with the towns that have done this and the trust, how many of them keep it themselves where the town's administering the trust, and how many of the towns, the trust is actually independent and run by a committee as you're proposing? I'd just be curious to know how they're doing it.
Yeah, we're working on a chart. We are all responsible for towns as to see whether or not what they had in their inclusionary zoning bylaws and housing trust. So we have that chart. We'll have it on the 19th.
Back to you.
That's it. But I would just say that for anyone who's on Twitter, my email address is Audrey for Walpole. I don't go on Facebook to read comments. So if you want to email me, Audrey for Walpole, FOR Walpole, at gmail.com. If you have any questions about this dry presentation.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, and I said this before, but we gave you this dry presentation because this is, congratulations, guys, like, this is all of it, right? Like, that's it right there. So you've successfully navigated the entirety of the language in this thing, because we want to put it out there. We want to have it so that people can have questions, have this discussion. And again, Audrey's available. I'm available with any question about any of this from you all, or if you hear it from people in the community, because we want to ensure that the information is being communicated and is out there, so that people can hear it. And it has been. We've had the public hearings, and the WHP has done so much work. Audrey and Andrew and Mike Teely, the vice chair, have done an extraordinary amount of work to prepare this, to go to these other towns, to interface with the MHP. It has been a months-long effort. This is no fly-by-night operation. So I just want to make sure that comes across with everybody and all the RTMs.
I will say it came across well on that.
Susan?
Through you. My question has to do really with procedure. So let's assume that town council reviews and finds the modified language is appropriate, given the scope and all the rest. You'll then have to have a change, and we can't really vote on the language because it's not the way it's drafted in the warrant. So are you planning to have a substitute motion at town meeting?
So the way we wrote it is we wrote a placeholder text, and this entire bylaw is within the scope of that placeholder text, where we had the 10 to 20%, and we referenced the statute. And so the idea would be much like the police did the fingerprinting article last time, where the bylaw is part of the town meeting packet, and the idea would be to have this bylaw as part of that, as part of the town meeting packet. So we're going to get the final text out to everyone in the town meeting packet. That's what we've been working towards.
So the text that was given to us tonight will be, the opening paragraph is the warrant article, and below that is the bylaw that will be implemented based on the vote.
So the text I gave you today is to replace that section, I think it was D, that in the longer inclusionary zoning bylaw.
Okay.
Under the mandatory provisions of affordable housing and the density bonus.
If I may just jump in here, think about the Fields project, right? Right now on the warrant, the Fields is just a little paragraph, but we just saw a huge detailed presentation about where all the funds are coming from. It's analogous to this. Right now in the warrant that closed on August 20th, we have a warrant article, and this motion, pending town council's review, that is multiple pages of the bylaw changes. As long as the moderator rules that it's within the scope of that original article, the motion, then there's no substitute motion needed.
So the warrant as it closed is exactly what we'll be voting on at town meeting.
Well, we're going to construct the motion with this bylaw text. I think that's what the idea would be. I'm not actually too clear.
Maybe.
Okay, so the Article 14 is in the warrant, is the town shall vote to amend the zoning bylaws to include any inclusionary zoning bylaw, which bylaw requires large developments to da-da-da-da-da. And so it doesn't actually get into the specifics of what that what the zoning bylaw will look like. It's saying that we will act on a zoning bylaw for inclusionary zoning on large developments, and this defines the size of the development and the contribution rate of affordable housing to it. So this would be the main motion. So this just says we're going to act on a zoning bylaw. This is the actual motion that'll be before them, is to vote this text.
Okay, so through you again, so if I understand it, the language of the bylaw will be printed in the warrant the way that we have it tonight.
In the
warrant's
closed,
so the warrant packet will say what.
The town meeting packet will be this.
Right.
And in the town meeting packet, there'll be a leaflet behind it, a binder insert or whatever.
And it will be what the language we have before us tonight.
Right, and what Mark was asking was, are we gonna set it up the way it is, and I think that's a good idea, to have it that way.
I would say save any sort of opinion from town council. And then we're meeting with the Mass Housing Partnership on the 19th to have everything, but I don't imagine many changes or any changes.
Okay, thank you.
The planning board is reviewing this on the 3rd of
October 3rd is a public hearing.
So I'd like to put forward a motion for recommendation at town meeting on Article 14.
seconded by Susan?
No, it's
Oh,
Josette.
Megan, Josette, okay. All right, so recommendation at town meeting, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I had one last question on 14, before we close out. The 10, 12.5, and 15% numbers here in this table, where do those come from? It looks like Yarmouth and Belmont were models. Is there a lot of variation across those thresholds across different towns, or is that kind of a standardized set of numbers?
Yeah, so that's kind of the standard of numbers, again, in mind that the 25% is the 40B numbers, and then 10% is enough to incentivize developers, and then in terms of their being able to afford with larger units, the 15% would
I
be
see, so
something.
the cost to a developer going 40B is that 25%. And so we want to be well under that cost, otherwise you're incentivizing them to go that route. These are like as low as we can go, but still contributing towards our 10%. I got it,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
And I should also be clear, this does not change our zoning bylaws as to where large multifamily development can be built. It can only be built in our zoning map determines that. So this has no impact on the fact that we can only build large multifamily units in certain districts.
That's a good presentation point, too.
Through you, so on, back to 14, where it says in the article, for example, at the end of the first paragraph, developers not wishing to provide these affordable units may pay into the Walpole Affordable Housing Trust, which doesn't exist.
Yeah, I took that out after the text, so it just says payment, we'll make a payment to the town. And so the updated draft, which I'll send to you and to Jim to go to town council, takes out Affordable Housing Trust, the cross-reference from the inclusionary zoning bylaw.
Okay, so, again, let me go back to my original question. So the article will be changed before it gets to town meeting.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. I get what you're saying. Yes, so that's a consideration as to whether or not that's outside the scope.
So, yeah, so before us is recommendation at town meeting, so it'll give them
Yeah,
time
no,
to
I know, I just
finalize
wanted
it.
to raise that.
Yeah.
because it
Yes,
seems to me
absolutely.
there is a-
And we've been in constant communication with the town moderator to make sure that
Good.
he understands and we're all clear.
I was focusing on the percent,
Yeah.
sorry. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? We have a recommendation to, we have a motion to recommend to town meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstain, 15-0-0. Article 15, Denny.
Yeah, recommendation for, Article 15, recommendation for, at town meeting, what am I saying?
Yes.
Now I'm getting
Motion
tired.
to recommend.
Motion for recommendation at town meeting on Article 15, that's
Yes.
it.
Okay. Do I have a
Second it.
Seconded by Susan.
What the hell am I saying?
Any other questions or comments?
Will this one be amended, or is this presented as is?
What was the question?
Will Article 15 be adjusted, or is the text that we were provided actually what it will?
So the text that you were provided this on Friday is what we're proposing, so it won't be amended.
For
the-
15?
For
But
15.
14 will.
So the only
Unless
change
town
from the
council-
warrant
Unless-
text,
okay.
I would say the only change from the warrant text was that I renumbered them to be letters to be consistent with our existing zoning bylaws, which use letters instead of numbers. Oh, and I also used the MGL for Mass General Law.
I found a couple of very minor spelling issues.
In the,
In 15.
okay.
All right. But the motion before us is
Not
recommendation at town meeting.
Well, we can move up.
So, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstain? One opposed?
Got it opposed?
Jeff? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good job.
So we now have, let's see.
That was it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 items that are going to be recommendation at town meeting. When do we want to schedule a meeting to reconsider those 6 articles? They are
14, 15, 19.
12, 14, 15, 18, 19, 20. As you remember, 18 through 20 are the citizens petitions. 12 is Sewer and Water Commission, the taking of Darwin Lane, which they will not be voting on until the 24th.
Yeah, probably the soonest, the earliest. I just wrote a note to myself to check on the status of the appraisal, so
Okay.
I'm waiting on that one, and that's what they were waiting on.
Okay, yeah, so they won't be meeting until the 4th Tuesday, which is, or the 4th Monday. It's the 23rd or 24th, so it wouldn't make sense to meet on that article until after they vote, which puts us to the 30th or October 3rd. Any preference?
Yeah, strong preference for the 3rd.
The 3rd?
I was gonna say, we did get Article 18. We got word back from the town
From the
council
attorney.
that,
Yeah, we
Right,
could do
it's
that.
not on our agenda to vote tonight, but obviously we can act on that. It's just a case of, do we want to make 2 meetings or 1 meeting, and when should that
I
meeting
got you,
be?
'cause it's on
And
the
same for 19 and 20, I think.
Yeah,
So I compiled all your
Mhm.
questions and the
Mhm.
responses as to how you want to vote on that one too, so
right.
those are just a couple of the outstanding ones.
I know Andrew's got a conflict on the 30th. Do we want to do it on Thursday, October 3rd?
'cause that's the night of
Of the planning board.
planning board. When's the town meeting? When's the public hearing?
Public
17th.
hearing is the 17th.
So,
Do we want to do 14th?
14's all.
The 10th is a Patriots game. The 7th?
The
It's
7th
down the
is,
street.
the 7th is
Monday the 7th?
Monday the 7th. That is Columbus Day. No,
No, the
no,
14th
14th
is
is
Columbus.
14th. Yeah, 7th? Yeah, 7th would work.
And then if there's a hiccup or something.
Monday
Yeah.
the 7th?
Monday, the
Still
October
public
7th?
hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll do all of our reconsiderations, or at least attempt to address them on October 7th?
No, it doesn't screw up with Patriots. I was worried about traffic, not watching the game.
Yeah, trying to get
Those
back
will
from our
grow.
locations. Okay. We do have one set of meeting minutes for the meeting of October 29th. And I'm sorry I didn't get back to you, Trevor, on the first page. Let's see. Right where it says the $380,000 number, and about halfway down the paragraph, they are asking, they're not offering the 380. Yeah, they're asking. Otherwise, we'd make a quick motion on that and take any other modifications?
I think there was Sarah Khatib, there's just a typo under Articles 19 and 20, petitioner S. Khatib, since
Okay.
Oh,
Khatib is a 17.
Also,
Let Claire hear you.
Claire, on the first page, 4 lines from the bottom, the worth of the property, if there is access, instead of is there is access. I'm on the first page, 4 lines up from the bottom. Property is, I think that is supposed to be an if. I think just change the second word is
Property
to
if there is
if
access.
there is access.
Anything else? There being no other modifications, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as revised.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of August 29th
By
as
Kathleen.
revised.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
If there is access. Oh, it's here, it's, yeah. It is
Have I been seconded with that?
Yes, you were seconded, yes.
Just died.
We hit you.
Oh,
We
it's
have
her
a
motion.
Motion to accept by Kathleen and seconded by Doug as revised. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained? Denny and Brian abstained?
And Susan.
And Susan. Okay, so 1203. Yes?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn by Denny, seconded by?
Second.
By Kathleen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained? Thank you for your time.